Welcome to today's episode of the Declutter Hub podcast, your channel for super easy, no-nonsense advice on how to declutter and organise your home. Please welcome your hosts, professional organisers Ingrid Jansen and Lesley Spellman.
Hello and welcome listeners to episode 70 of the Declutter Hub podcast. I'm Ingrid.
And I'm Lesley.
If you have clutter and want to sort it out, this is the show for you. As well as the free resources on our declutterhub.com website, like the podcast, checklists and guest blogs, we also have an exclusive area where we guide our members step by step to declutter their homes. We realize this can be very overwhelming, so we're there every step of the way with courses, live Q&As and a community discussion. Take a look on members.declutterhub.com if you'd like to find out more. In today's episode, Lesley and I are talking about getting your to-do list done. When you're decluttering and organizing, you will come across lots of jobs that you haven't done yet or haven't finished. And we recommend creating a to-do list and a to-do box to make sure those jobs don't disappear again under stuff. Now, Lesley, some people call it a to-do list. Some people call it a task list. Some people say we shouldn't make a list at all, but we like a list, don't we?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's the final part in the organisation, really, isn't it? To get your thoughts onto paper or onto something like Trello, an app, or on your notes on your phone. You know, lists come in all different shapes and sizes, they don't just need to be written down. Mm-hmm. I think it's fair to say that probably the majority of people are still using a paper list.
I actually read somewhere the other day that the paper and pen are making a bit of a return, that if you actually write something down, you're much better in containing and remembering the information than when you type it into a screen. So that was quite interesting. And I love a paper list. So I'm completely on board with the to-do list.
And I suppose what we're talking about, not just a standard to-do list, we're talking about something that comes about as a result of another task, aren't we? As a decluttering task. Mm-hmm. All those final things that you unearth when you're decluttering. Because when you're decluttering, you're then going through your stuff and seeing stuff for the first time, sometimes in many, many months or even years. And so you're unearthing things that sometimes need something doing with them.
Yes, and that's very true, because actually I was decluttering and organizing with a client of mine, and we found things that needed to be done and things that needed to be sorted and organized. And she's like, oh my gosh, Ingrid, I thought decluttering and organizing should give me less jobs. I'm only finding more jobs. And I'm like, well, they've been there the whole time. You just haven't seen them.
It's the same thing. Oh, I've not seen that for years. You know, how many times do we see that? Oh, gosh, I didn't know where that was. Or I've been looking for that. Or, you know, all those kind of things that come up. You do unearth things that you've lost or mislaid or just not seen, that have been buried under a pile of stuff. And so that brings with it tasks. And that's what we're talking about today.
Definitely. Because the thing is, all those things are in your head somewhere. In your hard drive, in your head. Somewhere there is a notification going, you need to fill out this form. There's but where is it? I don't know where it is. You need to sew that button on, but I don't know where the button is, or I don't know what the thing is where I should sew it on. So you know all these tasks and these things that need doing, but because they're buried and you can't see them, that doesn't mean they suddenly disappear from your brain.
Yeah, and they're scattered, aren't they? They're scattered around. They're not in one place where you can gather your thoughts together and put them onto one list all in one area. That's the thing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Definitely. So, Lesley, do you have a to-do list?
Well, I think you already know about my to-do list, Ingrid, because we were just talking about it before we came live on the podcast. And you said that you've got 3 lists, and yeah. I said I've got 6 lists. And so I think I outlist you today. But some of my lists have got 20 things on them, and some of my things have only got 1 thing on them. Mm-hmm. And some of my lists are also lists for clients, because I project manage things for clients. And so it depends on how you look at those lists and how you categorize them, I suppose. But I have literally got 6 lists sitting in front of me at the moment.
Okay. And that's all right. You know, I think what is really helpful is that you've not got one gigantic to-do list, but you've actually subcategorized it into personal, your Clutter Fairy business, the Declutter Hub, what we're doing today, you've got a list for 2 different clients. So I think that's already really helpful, that you don't have the list of all lists here, and that you kind of have to run through your whole one mega list all the time, but you actually can do it category by category. Again, it's categorization.
It is. I mean, this, of course, this is kind of taking us slightly off topic from where we were, because this is not as a result of a decluttering exercise.
Yeah.
This is just my standard to-do list.
Yeah.
But it's important, even within that, when you're decluttering, you still can categorize your lists. And I think there's probably going to be 2 main categories of lists that you're going to tackle. Hopefully you've not got 10 different lists, because that would be a little bit overwhelming. But what you're going to have is you're going to have paperwork type lists. So if you declutter your paperwork, that will create undoubtedly a lot of things that need action.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you declutter in a room, a kitchen, a bedroom, a spare bedroom, whatever, a garage, a loft, that's going to be more of a list about stuff that needs things doing with it, rather than actions that need to be done with the paperwork. So I think we can categorize it, certainly. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Into a paperwork and a kind of stuff, in inverted commas, list.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, one of my clients has a really big home office, and actually we found a lot of her stuff to-dos in there, because that's why she was keeping the stuff. So it's in her house, it was from everywhere, plus her home. It was not only paperwork that needed sorting and to be put on a to-do list, but it was also stuff that we found there. So let's talk about things that need doing and when you can create a to-do box. I called it a to-do box because we found things which needs action, but it wasn't paperwork. So that's why I created a to-do box. So what would we find in there then?
So if you've decluttered a room, for example, and it's, let's say you've done the bedroom, it's probably going to be clothing that need things doing to them. So maybe mending, maybe taking to the dry cleaners, maybe returning to your sister or your mum, maybe selling it on eBay, those kind of things. Is that what you're talking about? Those are the kind of things that are going to go into a to-do box.
Yeah, I would say definitely, like if you find a button that needs sewing on to a garment, that would definitely go in my to-do box. Or indeed shoes that need mending and needs to go to the menders, that could go in a to-do box. Those kind of really practical tasks that needs to be done. Or it can be, for example, we found my client had ordered some special batteries for a certain lamp that one of her kids had in the bedroom. But when we're sorting her stuff out, I didn't want to go up to her kid's bedroom, find the lamp, get it down, find the tool to replace the battery. So I said, let's put that battery in the to-do box. And then later today or over the weekend, when you've got time to get all the tools out and get the lamp, then you can fix the lamp of your kids. But we didn't put the battery kind of down somewhere to be never seen again. Or let me put it down here for now. And then it gets lost again amongst the other stuff. So that's why I think where a to-do box really helps.
And I think there's 2 things wrapped up in there. A, that you're keeping that stuff to one side to action later, and B, that you're not doing it there and then and getting distracted from the task at hand. Those are the 2 things, because how often do we see that when people trot off to do something that they find, thinking, I'll do it now while I think about it. But actually that's going to distract you and stop you from decluttering the room or getting to the end of that decluttering. So that's really, really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the interesting thing as well is that those kind of things, clothing that needs buttons or needs to go to the dry cleaners, until it's actioned, is effectively clutter, because it's something that you're not using and that you can't practically use because it's not almost fit for purpose at the moment. And that, if something's not been to the dry cleaners, it's not fit for purpose because it's not clean, it's got a stain on it, needs fixing before it can be used again. So think about those things as clutter. So effectively you're sort of extracting that clutter, putting it into a box, and then doing something to it, which means that it can potentially then be reused.
I'm really glad we're talking about this, because we want to give a few more examples so our listeners really understand what kind of things you find in there. So for example, I nearly always find a book that needs returning to the library or to the school from the kids. And it's gotten into the book collection, and then we're sorting through books. It's like, oh my gosh, that's not even my book. It needs to be returned. But you can't put it back in the bookcase. You can't put it down somewhere. So that's a perfect item to go in a to-do box, because it has to be returned to somewhere else. It can even be a letter that needs to be thrown into the neighbors because it was delivered wrong by the postman. It can be all those kinds of really random bits that you find and that need an action.
For things like that, there's going to be almost like a double action, isn't there? So we're going to put it in the first instance. While we're decluttering, we're going to put it into a box, and you and I will almost undoubtedly always have a box that we categorize things that need things to be done. That's the to-do box.
Yeah.
While we're decluttering. And then at that point, you're then going to go through that to-do box, and you're going to put those things in places where they are going to get done. Things like gift cards that you find in amongst paperwork, put it in your purse, because then when you go out shopping, it's in your purse and you can use it.
Mm-hmm.
Or even if you're buying online, when I buy things online, I undoubtedly, because I don't like to save my credit card details online, so I undoubtedly have to grab my purse before I can buy something online. So even if you're using that gift card online, it's in the right place. It's in the place where you would naturally go to buy things and spend money. Mm-hmm. And so it needs to be there. Things like school books that need to be returned to school, they need to be then put with your child's school bag or in your handbag to return to the library. So there's almost like a double step, isn't there, to getting things done? We talked about this very thing in episode 60, which was organising your entrance hall, if you've got an entrance hall, because quite often hallways become those magnets for clutter where people put things that need to be done. But you need to almost break it down. Sometimes, I could certainly put something on my hall table that needs to be posted for sure. And that would be a visual reminder to me because there's nothing else on the hall table that needs to be done. But if you put loads and loads of things on there, then it just becomes more visual clutter. So it's really important to think things through and put things in the place that you're actually naturally going to look for them when you're doing something.
Very, very true. And I think a to-do box can live in different places. For every house, there's the place for it where it makes sense to have this box. In my client's case, it was a utility room because that's where she spends a lot of time because she's in and out of there because for lots of different reasons. So for her, it lived there. I have a little flat area in my kitchen, which is almost my gathering area, where those kinds of things, because it gives me a reminder, okay, I need to bring that to the dry cleaners or to the menders or back to the library. So that's where I don't have a box, but it's my area where I keep those things together. So I think when you're decluttering and organizing and you're just starting out and everything is kind of everywhere, a to-do box is really, really helpful.
Definitely. I mean, mine's in my office because that's kind of almost my hub of where I get things done, really. So I keep those kind of things in my office.
Yeah. Yeah, and it can be, just to give another few examples, maybe you need to glue something back on and you've now ordered the glue, you're waiting for the glue to come in, and then you're like, right, I'm now going to get the part that I need to glue back on, and I know where that little part is, instead of I've put it down on a mantelpiece somewhere and I can't find it anymore. It can be that you need to put something back in a book because something got ripped out and you need to repair it, but you don't have time, or it can be a toy that needs sorting, batteries that need changing from an item. It's not a 2-minute job that can be done quickly, but it needs some more attention, or it needs a tool or an appliance or something that needs fixing. I think those kinds of things live in the to-do box.
Definitely. And, the kind of things that you mentioned where you have to glue something on, a lot of those things will be found in junk drawers up and down the country, won't they?
Mm-hmm.
Something falls off a little ornament or something gets smashed off the corner and you keep the corner, but you've not quite glued it on. So if you are decluttering a junk drawer, that's probably going to unearth quite a few little actions, to be fair.
Yeah, that is definitely true. It was so funny because I was over Christmas, one of my daughter unfortunately dropped one of my ornaments. I was not happy. And I was about to try to think I'm going to glue that back on. And then I kind of looked at it and I thought, no, that's not going to happen. I'm just going to make the decision now. I'm going to declutter these. But it hurt because it was one of my favorite ornaments. But so sometimes you have to also bite the bullet and go, am I really going to glue this back on? Or am I really going to go through the effort of trying to repair something if it's not going to happen? Bite that bullet instead of constantly seeing the same thing. I still haven't done it. Maybe it's just a matter of, never mind, not going to happen.
Talking about that kind of thing, the kinds of things that definitely sit in a to-do box often don't get done is selling things. So quite often people will say, well, I want to put that to one side because I want to sell it. We talk about this in other podcasts, whether or not it's worthwhile and whether that's actually going to happen. And so really be honest with yourself about whether you are actually going to sell something. Exactly the same with returning things to family members. So quite often people say, oh, I'm going to keep all those clothes to one side. I'm going to give them to my sister or my niece or nephew or whatever. And my question is quite often, well, when are you next going to see your niece or nephew? Because quite often it might only be once a year. So you've really got to think that through. Have you got the time, the space, the energy then to keep those clothes to one side for a year? Or would you not be better to just send them off to charity shop and get that job done?
Point very, very well made. Well, we can think of another probably 50 examples of things that can live in a to-do box, but let's just then move on to paperwork, Lesley, because paperwork, like you very rightfully so said, creates a lot of to-dos. In my universe, they don't go in a to-do box because that's more stuff. So I have a to-do folder where paperwork to-dos live in. Have you got that too?
I've not got a folder. So you like folders, don't you? This is where we always disagree. We always disagree, listeners. Because for me, and this is to explain my rationale again, for me, as soon as something goes into a folder, it means it's been filed away. And for me, that's kind of an archive system. Mm-hmm. But it's the same really, because I've got an inbox. But the difference probably, Ingrid, is I've got a home office that I can have an inbox in and you haven't. So you're wanting to create that within the rest of your house. So therefore you've not got the same scenario that I have where I can spread out a little bit on my desk with my inboxes and things. So that's where that comes from, because you have to work with the space that you've got. Yep. I've got an opportunity to have an inbox and you're like, well, I want it to be neat and tidy. This is my living room or my kitchen. I don't want papers out in an inbox. And so that's probably where that comes from. So I've got the benefit of having that. You haven't. So therefore you do a folder and I just use an in tray. But the same principle. It's all gathered together and it sits there until it's done.
Yeah. So what kind of things live in your in tray then, Lesley? What can we give as examples? So if you're doing a declutter, either yourself or with your clients, so what kind of things do we find that might be interesting for our listeners to know so they can understand what we're talking about here?
It's quite often phone calls that need to be made, isn't it, to double check things. And so people unearth bits for, I'm not quite sure about that. I will need to double check that. So quite often it needs follow up with a phone call or with an email or with putting something on a contact form. So that kind of thing. It might be something where you know that you want to change a bank account to a savings account and that just jogs your memory that that's something that you had thought about, that kind of thing. It might be that you've decided that you want to, that your insurance renewal has come in and that you think it's a little bit on the high side. And so you want to take the opportunity to do some price comparisons, that kind of thing, or utilities comparisons or whatever that might be. But those things take time, and the time that you're sorting your paperwork out to try and get a nice filing system together is not the time to do that. They need to be done afterwards. So for me, it would be kept in my in tray, and it would also go onto a list. Because I want the satisfaction of ticking things off a list.
That's interesting, because I agree with you. Most of my things indeed go on a list as well. And then I put them in my L folder where all my paperwork lives together. So I kind of almost have two reminders. I've got the paper reminder itself and I've got my list. And I like crossing it off my list as well. So I completely understand what you're saying. Yeah, it's maybe you come across MOT paperwork from your car and you think, oh gosh, I need to book an appointment for my MOT, or I need to register online. So I've been meaning to get my bank statements online and not anymore on paper. I want to do that, but you're not going to do it there and then when you're setting up a filing system or you're sorting through piles of paper. So those kind of things can all be put in a to-do file or to-do in tray to be done later.
And it really is a lovely thing to do that paperwork, and it gives you great satisfaction, doesn't it, to gather all your thoughts on paper and write them down. Sometimes just making a plan is enough to give you that boost, isn't it? It's all about gathering your thoughts, having a plan, putting them down on paper, and you know exactly what you've got to do. Same principle as when you write a to-do list when you're at work every day. This is what I've got to get done today. It's exactly the same thing. That's the project that I did. I'm going to gather my thoughts, write it down, and then I've got a systematic list that I can work through. Really, really important, rather than having all these things scattered around in the ether somewhere.
Yeah, Yeah, for sure. So we've got a to-do box. We've got an in tray. Great. We've got maybe even a to-do list with stuff. So it's not in our heads anymore. It will not be haunting our brain. We need to schedule time to do this, Lesley. This is not like, okay, it's great that it's now in a box. We actually need to action it. So that's, of course, the final step and the final piece of the puzzle is to, okay, I've got everything together now when I'm going to do these jobs, because otherwise they will still be waiting there to be done.
You're absolutely right. You need to get to the end point. We talk about this all the time, the cycle of decluttering and going through and going, decluttering, organizing, storage. You've got to get to the end before you can enjoy and before you can give yourself a pat on the back that means that you're going to maintain that system and go around that cycle again. Really, really important. So I think that to-do list is going to be, sometimes if it's a paperwork to-do list, you can absolutely schedule, right, I'm going to schedule a morning and I'm going to try and tick some of these things off your list. You need to think about the timing of that as well. So Sunday afternoon perhaps is not the best time to do a paperwork list because all of the people that you need to contact won't be working probably. And so it probably needs to be midweek or, just think about that. Or is there a helpline open till 8 o'clock at night or do they close up at 5 o'clock? Those kind of things need to be factored in. But if it's this kind of a stuff one, that's probably going to be scattered as part of your other errands, isn't it? So it's unlikely that you're going to go to your sister's to drop some stuff off, go to the dry cleaner. I mean, you might, but you know what I mean? But actually you're going to probably maybe write down, maybe what you need to do is put a notification in your phone if you are going to visit your sister to say, don't forget to take this stuff that I'm going to hand down to her or whatever that might be. Or if you know that you're going into town shopping on Tuesday afternoon, make sure you put a notification in your phone to say, don't forget to take the library book back. So it might be that the to-do stuff box is scattered across lots of different days, whereas the paperwork one probably needs a more concerted effort in time. And undoubtedly within that paperwork one, there will be things that are still not completed. Yeah, because there will be more actions as a result. You've rang somebody to say that you want to do some price comparisons and they're like, well, we'll send you a form out that you need to fill in or whatever. So it's not always finished there and then.
Yeah, and maybe if you have an extremely long to-do list, you can motivate yourself by doing some of the shorter tasks first, fill in the form online, register online, because you can do that within a couple of minutes and it's not a difficult task. And the list gets shorter so you feel like, oh, this is really good. Or maybe you realize you've got a really long list, but you're going to go by priority and you're going to go, you know what, I know that I've got a lot of small bits to do, but there's one thing that actually requires several steps. It maybe even involves other people, or it's the most important one of the list. And that's what I'm going to focus on next, because then at least I don't have to wait on my brain that I still haven't done it. So it really depends on the time you have and the priorities that you need to do. And indeed, with your to-do box, if you know maybe your next action is to look at your diary and go, indeed, oh, I am going to town on Thursday and I actually have a half an hour spare somewhere. So I can then pop into the dry cleaners, go to the menders, drop the book, and I can do a little circle of those things together. So you can sort of group things together and move things on at the same time.
And it's satisfying. I don't know anybody who doesn't get satisfaction from getting errands done and ticking things off a list. I think that's a universal enjoyment, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think it really helps you because I so agree with what you said. If it's unfinished, it is clutter. It is clutter in your house. And deep down that there's something that you need to do, something that you haven't done yet. And it's weighing on your brain. And I think when you start to actually do these actions, you start to create space in your brain to think about other things.
Yeah, so it's clutter in your house and clutter in your head, isn't it? Same thing again. It's that kind of a tidy desk, tidy mind, all those things. And they're all so true, aren't they? It just gives you that clarity that you need to move forward. It's very satisfying. I can absolutely recommend it.
Well, me too. I do love a list as well. And we are working on a list today, aren't we, Lesley? We need to cross some of those tasks off to make sure that we keep steaming ahead in 2020 and getting it all done and yeah, I do like a little tick list, and I cross it off. I don't tick it, I actually cross it through. I love that.
Sounds quite threatening. I feel like the list is getting threatened by Ingrid scoring it out with a biro. Yeah.
Ooh.
Also, the people who use electronic lists as well, I use something called Wunderlist quite regularly, although to be fair, I have reverted back now to a paper list since my task list has got bigger. I haven't got the time to put it on Wunderlist. There's so many things to do. But the electronic versions of them do a little ding, like ding, and so that's also quite satisfying to hear the dings going off as well. So anybody who uses an electronic list, that's quite cool. The nice thing about things like Wunderlist, and there's loads and loads of different to-do lists out there, is that you can share lists as well with other people. That's quite nice. So I use that quite often with clients. And so if we're doing a project together, they will write things on Wunderlist, and I might tick some stuff off and they might tick some stuff off. So there's benefits certainly in terms of sharing with using an electronic list.
Maybe I should share a list with my husband, and I can give him tasks.
Yes, exactly. Completely. That's exactly what it's for. Delegation. Write on your to-do list, delegate tasks to my husband. That's what
and to my kids. I said, this is not a hotel. We all have to do things in this house. And they're like, oh, no. They're good. They help, definitely. It's a team effort. That is absolutely true. You don't have to do everything yourself. So if you find stuff on your to-do list that you think to yourself, you know what? Why do I have to do this? Delegate some to the people who live in your house too. Or maybe you can delegate it by outsourcing it to a cleaner or carpenter or whoever that you need to have the task done by. You do not have to do everything yourself. And if you wonder why it's been on your to-do list forever, maybe you should make the decision and just cross it off and go, I'm not going to do this. It's been on my to-do list far too long. Why is it still on there? I'm not going to do this. Let's move on. Okay, Lesley. So, listeners, what are you going to do this weekend? Are you maybe going to write down a to-do list? Maybe that's what you need to do. And just start with writing on all the things that are swirling around in your head. Or maybe you are decluttering and you're thinking to yourself, you know what? Lesley and Ingrid are right. I need to create a to-do box because I've got loads of different little random things that need to be done. I need to create a to-do box, and that's going to help me take me to my next organizing level. Or maybe you are doing a paperwork project and you think to yourself, that sounds like a good idea. I'm going to create an inbox with all those things paper-wise that I want to do and to get myself more sorted and organized. So we hope this episode was really helpful. And we really appreciate you listening. And don't forget, we love to read your reviews. So if you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to write a review for us and tell us what you think about the show. If you'd like to get more tips and advice, please follow us on social media. We are on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook as @DeclutterHub. And we have a Facebook group where we chat all things clutter. And you can find us under the Declutter Hub community. We'd love to see you there. And take a look at members.declutterhub.com to find out more about our membership. If you don't want to miss the next weekly episode, subscribe to the Declutter Hub podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio, and it will pop into your notifications each Friday. Or share with a friend or a colleague or a family member that you really enjoy this podcast and you think they should listen to. So share our podcast details with other people. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Declutter Hub podcast. Check out declutterhub.com for more inspiration and don't forget to tune in next week.